most of us. I'm in the military and I'm fine. I like conflict. It's in my life, and I thought I would do some of my life too. So I'm going to pull some things out of stories. We're going to walk through the basics of it, and then I've got a few activities and some volunteer requests. So be prepared. All right. So today we're going to talk about individual conflict, small circle conflict or interpersonal, and big circle conflict or external. And then I've got a couple of games, an ending activity, and then I have some resources that I can email to you. I didn't want to print it because it was like it's 6 pages of a handout, and that's a lot of pages for each thing. But I can send you the link. So first, what is the importance of multidimensional conflict? It helps with every part of your storytelling, right? It is the meat and potatoes of the plot and the conflict. If there isn't anything that your character is butting up against, there isn't really any interesting part of the story. If everything works out in their favor, who cares, right? So it combines character development, engagement, realism, plot development, and theme exploration. And I'm going to get into how. So for character development, it shows that growth in your character. It can push them through that arc by forcing them to identify what they want and what they really need, and then move from that want to that need. They have to change over the course of the story in order to achieve the goal of the story in the end. And so you can see that arc and that development. Engagement. It can pull your reader into the story. If there's a lot of conflict, especially if it's conflict your reader can identify with and experience, then they're engaged in the story. They're invested in what happens. Realism. Nobody ever has just one problem. We all come up against conflict in multiple levels, right? Internally, we feel very self-conscious about something. In our interpersonal relationships or our small groups, maybe we're competing either physically or mentally with the situation to be the person that's being paid attention to or to not be paid attention to in that interpersonal circle. And in external conflict, maybe we feel a lot of guilt and pressure around environmental crises, or maybe we're in some society where there's a level of oppression and we're having to push up against that as well. So it adds that level of realism to your story that, again, your reader can identify with. Plot development. We all know this, right? Part of the plot. If there's no conflict, there's no plot. So by adding these different layers, you're helping to develop that plot in multiple facets to keep it interesting for your reader, to give your characters more to do. And theme exploration. Not necessarily something you have to consciously do, but as you go through the story and add in all those different conflicts, you can kind of sit back and see a theme develop throughout it. And you can consciously explore these different themes, morality, identity, power dynamics, as you go through by implementing specific conflicts that relate to these themes. Okay, so first let's go over individual conflict. And it's going to give you a lot of these different things. You'll see some patterns, but we're also going to get very specific and show you some story excerpts that show the individual conflict in popular things that most of us have probably read. So individual conflict refers to that struggle, the dilemma, and the challenges that are within the characters themselves. It rises from their desires and their fears, their beliefs, moral dilemmas that they are put through throughout the story, and it's intrinsic to a specific character's nature. So what is an internal conflict for one character is not going to be the same for another character. It can also intertwine with their personal journey and development throughout the story, which again makes it a lot more interesting. If they have a specific flaw or conflict within themselves that they're having to overcome to go through that story, then it's really interesting to watch them change and develop and work through that flaw or work with that flaw as they move toward their goal. It serves as that catalyst and that transformational experience, driving them to confront those inner demons, right? Overcome their obstacles and evolve throughout the course of the narrative. By grappling with their own internal conflicts, these characters are forced to confront those flaws. They reconcile the conflicting emotions, and ultimately they can undergo self-discovery, self-realization, everything that they need in order to hit rock bottom, come back up, dig deep, find that strong point within them, and win the day. So adding depth and complexity, it's relatable, multidimensional, and it explores those inner struggles. So readers can gain a better insight into your characters by seeing exactly how they're struggling internally with any conflict that they come up against. So we'll talk a little bit about how these are all kind of intertwined and can combine. But if your character is going up against some demon, let's say for example, they're going to have maybe an internal conflict that's different from the other characters. Their demon might have to do specifically with a flaw that other characters aren't encountering. That demon's talking to their self-consciousness, and they're having to dig deep and figure out, how do I find the strength and courage within myself? Whereas maybe the character next to them has a deeper trauma that they're having to deal with. And it's not self-consciousness. Maybe it's secrets that they have withheld that are now coming to light. So you can see how different things that they confront is going to be reflected internally in different ways. Propelling that character arc forward. So again, fostering growth, transformation, and this is a fundamental element that can drive that narrative. All right, so I hope you all got a good look at that because it was the cheat sheet. We're gonna do a quick little game, and I have 3 stories here I pulled excerpts from. I have redacted them to make it a little more challenging, and I want one person to read this aloud if you can see it. If nobody can see it, I'll read it aloud. And I want everyone to raise their hand as they realize what excerpt this is from. So who wants to read? All right, thank you.
Black felt his heart beat faster and faster as he climbed the stairs. He couldn't help but wonder if he was really the chosen one, destined to defeat blank. The weight of the prophecy hung heavy on his shoulders, a constant reminder of the expectations placed upon him. Can you read the other thing? Okay. As he reached the top of the stairs, Blank's thoughts turned to his friends and their safety. He couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that had been growing within him since he first learned of the prophecy. Despite being surrounded by people who cared for him, Blank couldn't help but feel alone in his struggle. Fear gnawed at him, threatening to consume him whole. Fear of failure, fear of letting down those who believed in him, fear of losing everything he held dear. It was a constant battle, one that waged within him every waking moment. But amidst the turmoil, Blank found a glimmer of hope, a determination to face his destiny head on, to stand up to Blank and fight for what was right. It was a small flame, flickering in the darkness, but it was enough to keep Blank going. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Blank squared his shoulders and stepped forward, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. For he knew that no matter how daunting the task, he would face it with courage and resilience, for he was Blank, the boy who lived.
Does anyone not know where that's from?
I know.
No? Okay. Harry Potter.
Oh.
Okay. So here we see Harry's internal conflict revolving around his identity and his destiny as the boy who lived, the chosen one to defeat Voldemort. So throughout the series, he struggles with those feelings of isolation, of failure, of the burden of the prophecy, and all of which contribute to his inner turmoil and his personal growth. All right, I need another volunteer. All right, thank you.
I don't know who I am, but if you'll help me, I'll find out. I look into those blue eyes, and no amount of dramatic makeup can make truly deadly. And remember how, just a year ago, I was going to kill him, convinced he was trying to kill me. Now everything is reversed. I'm determined to keep him alive, knowing it costs me my own life, but the part of me that is not so brave as I could wish is glad that it's Blank, not Blank beside him. Our hands find each other without further discussion. Of course we're friends now, best friends. We move on together to the next station, still hand in hand.
A little tougher. You know this one. Yeah? Yes, it's Hunger Games. So we see Katniss Everdeen grapple with internal conflict related to survival, identity, morality throughout the entire series. She navigates the brutal Hunger Games arena and becomes a symbol of rebellion. Katniss struggles with guilt over the choice she must make to protect herself and her loved ones, as well as her role as a reluctant leader in a revolution. A lot of internal conflict, a lot of pressure for a teenager. And last one for internal. Who wants to read? It's short.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened when it first happened. So do all who live to see such times. That is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
Yeah, you know what it is? Lord of the Rings. Ah. So we see Frodo Baggins experience profound internal conflict as he carries the One Ring to Mount Doom. Despite his determination to destroy the ring and save Middle-earth, he battles with that corrupting influence of the ring. So an actual physical object is influencing his internal conflict. And we see it testing his loyalty, his courage, his sanity, and leading to moments of doubt and despair. All right, so now we're going to move on to small circle or interpersonal conflict and show how it kind of relates to internal conflict as well as adding on that second layer. So small circle refers to interpersonal, and it occurs within a limited group of characters. That can be friends and family, colleagues, small communities. Unlike individual conflict, which is internal to the character, the small circle conflict rises from the interactions and dynamics between the characters and those relationships. You can see this in the tension and the conflict that emerges from disagreements, misunderstandings, power struggles, competing interests, and it often revolves around these specific issues: jealousy, betrayal, loyalty, competition, differing values and priorities. It manifests as arguments, secrets, manipulation, or passive-aggressive behavior. So if you're struggling with incorporating some interpersonal conflict, I highly recommend making a list for yourself, right? And if you're going through and trying to figure out how can I add in more of this kind of micro conflict, interpersonal thing that's maybe not the purpose of the book, you've got a big plot and a big thing, world-defying thing that the characters are working toward, but on that journey, there's got to be something that propels the reader forward, right? So make a list for yourself, check through it, be like, what can I do to add in a little bit more here? All right, doing this, it reveals complexities in human relationships and dynamics of close-knit groups. Again, delving into more themes: trust, loyalty, betrayal, consequences of interpersonal dynamics, and layers of tension and drama to the narrative. This drives characters forward, propels the plot. Some examples of this are like sibling rivalry. Pride and Prejudice, two siblings compete for their parents' attention and approval, right? This leads to jealousy and resentment between them. In Twilight, we see the love triangle as interpersonal conflict, a romantic relationship between the three of them that is heartbreaking and it causes emotional turmoil. Office politics. In The Devil Wears Prada, we see a conflict between workers who are vying for promotion and recognition, and this leads to tension, backstabbing, and power struggles. And then if anyone's read The Kite Runner, this is a story about friendship betrayal. So we see conflict between those friends and the betrayal between them, deception, conflicting loyalties, and it breaks down the trust and it dissolves that relationship ultimately. All right. Another read. Who wants to do it?
In this scene, tensions reach a boiling point as the forces of House Blank clash with those of House Blank in a fierce and chaotic battle across a vast desert landscape. Amidst the chaos of the conflict, alliances are tested, betrayals are revealed, and power struggles come to the forefront as characters on both sides maneuver to gain the upper hand.
Okay, so instead of an excerpt, it's kind of a summary, because it's hard to find that within the excerpt. Any guesses what story this might be? Dune. Oh, you know. Okay. So in this distant future, noble houses compete for the control of the planet Arrakis. And we see interpersonal conflict arise among the rival factions, including the ruling house Atreides and the scheming house Harkonnen. I hope I'm saying those right. And then we see tensions escalate as the characters navigate these complex alliances, these betrayals, power struggles, and it leads to political intrigue and some epic battles. All right, I'll read through this one. It's a little longer. In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Blank's response: You are too hasty, sir. You forget that I have made no answer. Let me do it without further loss of time. Accept my thanks for the compliment you are paying me. I'm very sensible of the honor of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than to decline them. Blank's surprise and offense. Can you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connections, to congratulate myself on the hope of relations, whose condition in life is so decidedly beneath my own? I feel like I'm in a Shakespeare play. And then Blank's indignation. You are mistaken, Mr. Blank. If you suppose that the mode of your declaration affected me in any other way than as it spared me the concern which I might have felt in refusing you, had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner.
This one I know.
Yeah, I thought the romance readers might know. Pride and Prejudice. So here we see the interpersonal conflict between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy due to their initial misunderstandings, prejudices, and social class differences. The conflicting personalities and prideful attitudes lead to misunderstandings, arguments, emotion, or turmoil before they ultimately reconcile and find love. All right. Horror writers, you're up. I'll read this one, it's also long. Blank stumbled through the darkened corridors of the Overlook, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The isolation of the hotel weighed heavy on his soul, suffocating him with its oppressive silence. Yet beneath the surface, a malevolent presence stirred, whispering dark promises of power and redemption. He glanced back at his family, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Blank clutched to Blank, her chest, her eyes pleading for reassurance that Blank was unable to provide. The tension between them crackled like electricity in the air, fueled by the growing sense of dread that permeated the hotel's walls. As the days wore on, Blank felt himself slipping further into madness, his grip on reality loosening with each passing hour. The voices in his head grew louder, urging him towards acts of unspeakable violence. He knew he should resist, but the pull of the supernatural forces within the hotel was irresistible, drawing him deeper into the abyss. And then one fateful night, the darkness consumed him entirely. In a moment of madness, Blake turned on his family, his eyes burning with a madness that was not his own. The violence that erupted in the halls of the Overlook was both terrifying and inevitable, a chilling testament to the destructive power of the hotel's malevolent influence. Any ideas? The Shining, yeah! All right, so pretty clearly some interpersonal issues as well as some internal conflict, right? So the conflict escalates between Jack Torrance and his family as Jack descends into madness, possessed by supernatural forces, and it drives him to violence and insanity. The isolation, paranoia, and supernatural horrors within the hotel fuel tension, terror, and lead to that chilling, suspenseful narrative. All right, we're going to move on to big circle conflict now. We're going to cover society, environment, and plot circumstances. This is usually what people think about when they think about conflict. And so these are the big picture things. When we create conflict, we're presenting our characters with those challenges and obstacles and adversities that they have to confront in order to overcome and complete their goal in the story. This drives the narrative forward, shapes character development, and it engages readers by tapping into universal themes and struggles. This is what's on that back jacket blurb that makes people pick up and buy the book. In society, for external conflict, we see that the broader culture, political, and social context is what the characters might be pressing up against when they exist in that story. They can arise from social norms, expectations, and institutions that impact the characters' lives and their choices. And it can come from the fact that the character wants to challenge or deviate from those societal expectations. And again, this leads to judgment, ostracism, or persecution. So we can see how a character may push up against this societal expectation that they don't fit into, and what the consequences of that are going to be that causes that external conflict. But then we can also see how this will relate to interpersonal conflict. It's not just pushing up against society as a whole, it's now how does my family react to me not fitting into their society? Now how do I feel, for the internal conflict, about being rejected by my family and the wider society because I can't fit into their societal expectations? So we can look at social hierarchy, discrimination, injustice within society, and that creates that conflict related to power dynamics, privilege, and equality. And again, characters may also experience the internal conflict as they grapple with their identity, with belonging, and when placed in a society that leads to struggle for acceptance and validation. So these might not be things that are like top of mind. You might just say, I want to write a dystopian novel, right? I want to write something about the rebels and the corrupt organization. I'm not talking about my book, but I am. And so if you just want to write that story, that's a great story. You don't have to think over hard about these conflicts because they inherently come out when you write it, right? And if you look back and look at your story, you can kind of see the patterns weaving throughout that might relate to the theme that you didn't intentionally put in there, but you've peppered in these different kinds of conflicts. And so you can see how you, as a human being going through conflict in life, have now transferred your more inexpensive therapy into the page that your character can relate to. All right, so environment. This is the actual physical setting, the conditions your character is going through, and what they interact with. Environmental factors can include things like weather, geography, natural disasters. They pose challenges for your character, forcing them to react as they are trying to reach their goal. They face conflict when they have to confront these harsh and inhospitable environments, and when their survival, either metaphorically, physically, mentally, spiritually, any kind of survival, is threatened, and their search for well-being continues. So maybe a character is stranded in the wilderness or battling extreme weather conditions, and they have to contend with those elements in order to survive and reach their goal. So it's not the goal that they're battling with necessarily. It's one more roadblock in their way to get to the goal. You can include things like environmental degradation, pollution, resource scarcity is a really good one that can fit into a lot of different genres. And it creates conflict related to environmental conservation, sustainability, resource management. But characters can also experience internal conflicts as they adapt to those surroundings. And they have to confront those surroundings. It shows their vulnerability, resilience, resourcefulness. So again, character development is showing up here in the face of these challenges. And last, we look at plot circumstances. So again, this is the back jacket blurb. This is the physical thing that your character is up against, their goal in the story. The specific events, situations, and challenges that drive that narrative and shape the character's actions and decisions. They encounter those obstacles, setbacks, or adversities that impede their goals or desires, and their conflicts propel the plot and drive the character. So they can be external threats or antagonistic forces like villains, but not necessarily villains, rivals, antagonistic groups who oppose the protagonist's objectives, and this creates tension in the objectives. The characters can also experience these conflicts as they confront moral dilemmas, ethical quandaries, difficult choices that test their values, their integrity, and their principles. Like a classic hero story, you're up against the hardest battle, the worst villain, and you have a choice. You can either stay true to your values and risk losing everything, or you can have the easy out, drop your values entirely, maybe go over to the dark side and survive, win the day, whatever it might be. And the choice essentially is what makes the character who they are. Are they going to give in to these circumstances, or are they going to stay true and risk everything, right? Conflict. So it escalates the stakes, it escalates tension, escalating consequences as they go through and confront each and every conflict. And for the character, this heightens the dramatic tension and the interest for the reader. Last one. Who wants to read it?
In our courts, when it's a white man's word against a black man's, the white man always wins. They're ugly, but those are the facts of life.
Where's that from?
Yeah.
Yes. So we see here societal norm and racial prejudice of the 1930s American South create this conflict for these characters. And characters like Atticus Finch, who defends an innocent black man, who's accused of raping a white woman. Atticus faces backlash and condemnation from his community for challenging the deeply ingrained racism and injustices of the time. So, incredible conflict there. And it's a courtroom drama. All right, this is a long one. Who's brave? All right, go ahead.
Line's heart thudded in her chest as she surveyed the landscape before her. The arena stretched out in all directions, a cruel and unforgiving expanse of wilderness teeming with dangers at every turn. The harsh terrain was unlike anything Blank had ever encountered before. Rocky cliffs rose menacingly on one side, while dense forests loomed on the other, concealing unseen threats lurking within their depths. The ground beneath her feet was uneven and treacherous, littered with hidden traps and pitfalls waiting to ensnare the unwary. But it was not just the natural hazards that posed a threat to Blank's survival. The other tributes, each one as desperate and determined as she was, prowled the arena like predators, their eyes gleaming with hunger and hostility. Every encounter was a deadly game of cat and mouse where one wrong move could mean instant death. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against her, Blank refused to back down. With every fiber of her being, she fought to stay alive, using her wits and survival skills to outmaneuver her opponents and defy the oppressive regime that sought to control her fate. As she moved cautiously through the treacherous landscape, Blank knew that her only chance of survival lay in staying one step ahead of her enemies and never letting her guard down. For in the arena, where every moment was a battle for survival, only the strongest and most cunning would emerge victorious.
Where's this from? Hunger Games. I cheated. I used it twice. Okay, so it's a dystopian society, right? Pan Am subjects are televised in a fight to the death as punishment for a past rebellion. We see Katniss navigating treacherous arena, facing external threats like the harsh terrain and deadly traps, and other tributes, as well as strategizing to survive and defy the government. So lots and lots of layers, lots of big conflict in this one, as well as micro conflict and individual conflict. All right, very last reading. Volunteers. I have time, so.
As chaos erupted across the island, Dr. Blaine found himself sprinting through the dense jungle, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, the earth shook, each thunderous footstep of the towering Tyrannosaurus Rex, his primal roars reverberating through the air. Blake's mind raced as he struggled to process the events that had led to this nightmare. The ambitious vision of Blake, the park's creator, had promised a revolutionary breakthrough in entertainment and science. A theme park filled with living, breathing dinosaurs brought back from extinction and genetic engineering. Now, that vision had become a terrifying reality, as the once contained creatures roamed free, unleashing chaos and destruction upon the island. Amidst the chaos, Blake grappled with his own internal conflicts. As a paleontologist, he dedicated his life to studying dinosaurs and unlocking the mysteries of their ancient world. But now, faced with the consequences of Blake's reckless ambition, Blake questioned the ethical implications of resurrecting creatures long extinct, playing with forces beyond human control. Yet, even as he wrestled with these existential questions, Blake knew that survival was paramount. With each step, he pushed himself forward, driven by the primal instinct to stay alive and protect those around him. For in this unforgiving landscape, filled with creatures of unimaginable power and ferocity, only the strong would endure. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the island into darkness, Blake pressed on, navigating the treacherous terrain, haunted by the echoes of a world long gone, and the chilling realization that in the battle between man and nature, the dinosaurs had reclaimed their dominion. So you've probably all seen the movie.
Yes. Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park, yeah. So this is a plot circumstance conflict that we're kind of looking at here, and that is the theme of the dinosaurs became a nightmare that they had to deal with. But in addition to that, there's also the harsh terrain. There's characters having to contend with the threats of the danger and survival, ethics, responsibility, in addition to Dr. Grant's own internal conflict of, maybe he thought he wanted this, but now he realizes he doesn't. A classic character change, right? A classic part of an arc of a character thinking they want something, and as the conflict pushes and pushes, helps them realize it's not really what they want as they reach their goal. All right. So now I want to take a few minutes, and I want everyone to write down, type down, think down the three conflicts in your own thesis. The individual conflict of your main character, the interpersonal conflict in a group that they interact with, and the external conflict that they deal with. This can be any and all, any combination of the ones we've gone over. That's been 3 minutes. Does anyone want more time? No? All right. We'll go ahead and stop there. Does anyone want to share their 3 conflicts?
I'm gonna list out some from my thesis, which you may have heard last night, gave a little bit red. So chastity is given an ultimatum that goes against her own wants and desires. Andy's doubts keep him from taking action. And then Darian's hunger for revenge puts the others at risk, physically and societally.
Okay, so we see Chastity's internal conflict, then her interpersonal conflict with Devlin, and then her position in society is threatened, so then the external conflict. That's good. Who else?
So my main character, Sterile Cinder, has like a guilt and unwillingness to forgive himself for what he's done to his wife. And then he has his lack of emotion and inability to connect and interact with other humans, particularly like the people that are in his circle in the story. And then hit like the main overarching, which is like the contract he must complete, which is to bring a high noble to justice for a murder, which will allow him to revoke his curse, essentially.
Good. So we see his internal conflict. We see his unwillingness to connect with others, which is going to have consequences that will show in those interpersonal conflicts. And then assuming every roadblock is in his way to achieve his goal, right? That's where that external conflict comes in. That's great. Anyone else?
So my main character, Evander, he can't make decisions. So when it comes time to take his own life into his hands, he doesn't know what to do because everyone has decided what should be done for him his entire life. So the small circle is his grandmother is the primary one who has been setting a path for him and controlling him and manipulating him to do what she wants him to do, and he has to confront her about those things. In the big circle there is a rogue militia group that is threatening and attacking his nation, and one of those expectations is he should defend his nation, help fight them off, and protect everyone. So he has to deal with that as well.
Wow. So someone who can't really even deal with conflict in their own life has to go and deal with the conflict that is threatening the wider country, essentially. That's really cool. That confrontation with the grandmother, so it seems like there's going to be a lot of internal growth that has to happen just interpersonally before he can even try to tackle that external threat. That's pretty powerful. Anyone else? Is anyone having trouble thinking about one of those conflict levels in their thesis? And maybe wants to brainstorm as a group for a few minutes? It's fun to think about these things because you can go down rabbit holes here too, right? That list can go on and on and on and on. And if you include every single potential conflict rabbit hole in your thesis, it can end up being a lot, right? So it's fun to list these things out and kind of see where your strongest conflicts are. Internally, you've got characters who will have all of the conflicts internally that any one of us could have. But then they've also got to deal with the internal conflicts that are consequences of their interpersonal relationships and their external conflict. Interpersonally, it's very similar as well, right? Whatever the purpose of, you've got a ragtag group of people together, there's going to be conflict between them as they figure out their roles in this ragtag group. There's going to be conflict between them as they go up against the overall external conflicts and the plot. They're going to change individually as they go through the stories, and that might change what the conflicts between them are as well. And then externally, you can add in all kinds of fun things for that. If it's the terrain that they're going on this journey through, if it's the society that they have to contend with as they're trying to reach their goal, if there is monsters involved, if that plot is becoming increasingly more difficult and there are more roadblocks put in place as they go through. And again, the external plot can have to do, or the external conflict can have to do with the plot itself, or it can be conflicts that are in addition to the plot, preferably both. So what I like to do is make a list of all of these different potential conflicts that could arise from my story. And as we go through, if I'm having trouble, I'll pick from it, but more than likely I'm including too much. And so then I can go through and be like, okay, what can I pare down and strengthen? How can I make this conflict a little more difficult for my main character, for my main team as they go through? And that can make your story clearer and more succinct, but also more powerful because you're doubling down on the most insightful, the most powerful, the most interesting aspects of the conflict of your story. Right? Does anyone have any questions as we go through? No?
You mentioned monsters, and I was thinking of, obviously fantasy, as my brain goes, but how can that apply to like romance?
So, great question. As we saw with Krista, the interpersonal is mainly just between two people, right? The whole story is about the two people, or more people, I guess. But for your case, two people who are getting together, but their relationship can also have conflict in their small circle, right? Say we've got people of two different classes who are getting together, Pride and Prejudice, right? His circle is going to be different from her circle. So we see now the clash of two different circles and their individual conflict and having to defend their relationship, how they feel about that. The person of the lower class is going to have internal conflict about her responsibility, for example, to her family versus leaving her family to level up in a sense, right? And his internal conflict, or the higher class internal conflict, is going to be between loving this person and leveling down, having to compromise the position of himself and his family, which is going to affect a greater part of that community, right? It might put them in jeopardy in their class or in whatever group that they are in as Regency romance, I'm thinking, for example. And so they're having to make sacrifices for that. And then that, that wider external conflict is their position in society. It's their livelihood. It's their security. It's everything in this particular case. So that conflict can be wide-reaching in a lot of different directions. Does that answer your question? Yeah. What about other genres? Are there any? We talked a little bit about horror. That's kind of easy with horror, in my opinion, because you can lean heavily on those external conflicts, and they influence the internal conflict in a morality sense. But maybe that interpersonal conflict might be lacking there, in a sense, because in horror we isolate a lot, and that's part of the genre trope and like the obligatory scenes that go in there. What other genres do we have in here? Mystery? Lots of conflict. Like you start with the murder, the crime, the whatever, immediate conflict. And then as you go through and hit every clue or red herring and roadblock, right? You're discovering more and more. And so you're hitting up against conflict between the person doing the investigating and the wider society. Maybe the villain is getting closer to them as they get closer to the villain, and it's creating more conflict from a survival perspective. It can go anywhere from the micro conflicts of having to deal with the bureaucracy of the police station to the survival of the entire community if there's going to be a toxin released into the water or something like that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I have a sort of different question. One of the things I struggle with is in a scene when two characters are working towards the same goal, how to make that interesting, because there really isn't any conflict. I mean, there's the overall plot conflict, but how to make it more interesting than just, oh, now we need to do this, this, and this to accomplish our goal. And how do you introduce conflict where it's hard to find it in that scene?
So what I would do in that case is I would have them try to approach it from two different angles, right? They're opposing in their views, maybe their personal values, and what the right way to achieve that goal is. And so maybe because they're doing that, they're getting in each other's way. And it's that constant tug of war between either who's going to get it first, which way is the right way, do we have to work together or can we do this alone? Maybe it's putting their relationship in jeopardy because of this conflicting value system. So I think that's a lot of fun. Two people with the same goal, but they go about it in completely different ways. Yeah.
I felt like the common read did that well. We had Abby and Rhea, I think her name was. They both wanted to save hope.
Mm-hmm.
And Abby wanted to go into the mine like immediately.
Right now.
Rhea's like, can we take a step back and like get some flashlights at the very least? You know, like she wanted to be prepared. Like she's like, I want to save hope too. I just want to do it in a smarter way.
Mm-hmm.
So that they both had the same goal, but they just had differences in how to go about doing it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as horror goes, like, it's true, there tends to be like something, maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's, just a rabid dog, like in Cujo or something, but like, a common trope within horror in terms of interpersonal conflict is like the Cassandra character, where we're trying to warn the other characters about they're not gonna leave, or the police brush them off, or, let's say, some ghost investigators or something come to investigate go to a haunted house or go on by a house that has a bad reputation but is suspiciously cheap and people refer to it as them,
Mm-hmm.
or the neighbors will treat them weirdly or whatever, so then you have that interpersonal conflict there. So that's a pretty frequent thing that pops up in horror.
And what I thought of, I love 90s slasher films, is that there's always one character that's like, we should investigate that sound,
Yeah.
right? And maybe the other characters are like, yeah, let's do it. But more than likely, there's one who's like, that's the dumbest idea. So now there's a choice, right? Let that character go and sacrifice herself, or force her to stay together with the group, and there's conflict there. Yeah. I saw one over here.
I was just going to talk about, it comes down to a lot of times just characterization,
Mhm.
and just, having those different, I was going to date, like the odd couple, right? You got the neat freak and the slob,
Yeah.
and how they go about it.
Yeah, it's to cheat, right? I need to add conflict, character development, into my story. All right, so I also have this handy dandy resource here that I consulted in order to create this for y'all. And lots of great books. Yes, there's tons of great information in here that is not just about conflict, but character development, plot development. All of this intertwines pretty neatly together. And so when you focus on one, you tend to learn about the others on the journey too. So I can send this to y'all as well if you want me to. Just email me and remind me. And yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up? No? Okay. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.